What would you do if the person you trusted most was hiding a deadly secret? For decades, Edward Wayne Edwards appeared to be a devoted father and family man, his troubled past buried beneath the surface. To his daughter, April Bellaccio, he was simply Dad, a man who could be both loving and unpredictable. But as April grew older, fragments of her childhood began to resurface. Memories of late-night moves, hushed conversations, and strange behavior that had always seemed too easy to ignore. These fragments formed a disturbing picture, one that revealed a truth she could never have imagined. Her father was a serial killer. Welcome to CrimeByte, the channel where we uncover the dark truths behind real-life crimes. If you're as passionate about uncovering the mysteries of the criminal world as we are, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. By doing so, you'll never miss an update as we dive into the gripping and unforgettable cases that keep you on the edge of your seat. Join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts today. In this episode, we bring you one of the most haunting stories in true crime history. The chilling account of a daughter who uncovered the unthinkable, her own father's trail of murder. Prepare for a tale of betrayal, bravery, and the relentless search for justice. This is the story of April Bellaccio, a woman whose courage led to the capture of one of America's most elusive killers. But the question remains, how many lives were destroyed before the truth finally came to light? Edward Wayne Edwards was a man of contradictions. To those who knew him casually, he was a charismatic figure with a larger-than-life personality. He could charm anyone in the room, spinning tales of his adventures and laughing with an infectious energy that drew people in. But for his family, the reality of Edwards' character was far more complex. Born in Akron, Ohio, Edwards' early life was marked by instability and hardship. Orphaned at a young age, he bounced between foster homes and reform schools, leaving behind a string of minor offenses. His early years were a study in contradictions, a boy with potential but no stability, a dreamer with a propensity for trouble. As he grew older, Edward learned how to use his charisma to his advantage. He could win people over with his quick wit and captivating stories, but behind the charm was a restless drifter, unable to stay in one place for long. His past was riddled with secrets, and his temper was something to be feared. To his children, Edward was both a loving father and an enigma. He could be warm and affectionate one moment and coldly distant the next. His temper, often quick and unprovoked, left a lasting impression on those around him. The man who could charm a room was also capable of creating an atmosphere thick with tension. One of the most unsettling aspects of Edward's life was his constant need to move. For his family, these late-night relocations were a routine part of life. He'd gather them up with little warning, insisting they leave immediately, often in the dead of night. To April, it was strange but normal, just another part of growing up with a restless father. But there was more to Edward's restless nature than met the eye. His frequent moves weren't just the result of wanderlust. They were a pattern, a way to cover his tracks and leave no trace of the darkness he carried with him. April Bellaccio's childhood was far from ordinary. From an early age, she noticed things that didn't quite add up: the constant moving, the late-night relocations, and the moments of tension that seemed to come out of nowhere. At the time, it all felt strange but normal, a part of life that she never questioned. But as she grew older, those memories began to take on a darker significance. April's family moved often, sometimes with little explanation. One night they'd be settled in a new town, the next they'd be packing up and leaving in the middle of the night. Edward always had a reason, an opportunity, a disagreement, or simply a need for a fresh start. But for April, these abrupt moves left her with a sense of unease she couldn't quite explain. Dinners at the Edwards household were a reflection of the man at the head of the table, unpredictable and often unsettling. Edward's temper could erupt without warning, leaving the family in a state of constant vigilance. For April, these moments were a stark contrast to the warmth her father could show in other times. As a child, April didn't think much of her father's peculiar habits. His frequent interest in crime stories and his insistence on secrecy seemed odd but harmless. It wasn't until years later that these moments would stand out as red flags, clues to a far more sinister reality. For Edward, these moves were a way to stay one step ahead. But for April, they were a source of confusion and instability. She couldn't understand why her family could never put down roots, why her father always seemed to be running from something. As a kid, I didn't question it. That was just life with my dad. But looking back now, it all makes sense. The moves, the secrets, the way he always seemed to know when it was time to leave. He wasn't just running from bad luck, he was running from the truth. How many secrets can a family hide before they begin to unravel? And what happens when those secrets are far darker than anyone could have imagined? Years after leaving her turbulent childhood behind, April Bellaccio began to revisit the memories she had worked so hard to forget. Late-night moves, unexplained tension, and the feeling that her family was always running, it all began to nag at her. The questions she'd pushed aside for years now demanded answers. It started with a simple observation. The towns they left behind often shared eerie similarities. Communities gripped by fear, unsolved murders, and whispers of danger that seemed to follow them wherever they went. April began to wonder if her father's frequent moves weren't as innocent as they had seemed. Her search led her to a series of murders that had haunted small towns across the Midwest. Each one bore striking similarities: young victims, violent deaths, and an absence of any clear suspect. The more she read, the more the puzzle began to take shape. Her research revealed an unsettling pattern. Each town they had lived in seemed to coincide with an unsolved murder. The dates matched the timeline of her family's moves, and the proximity was too close to be a coincidence. Edward Wayne Edwards, her father, always seemed to vanish just as suspicion began to grow. For April, the realization was both shocking and terrifying. The memories she had buried, the hurried relocations, the cryptic explanations, now seemed like pieces of a much darker story. But she needed proof to confirm her growing suspicions. "I started to see the connections," April says. "It was like every time we left a town, something terrible had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that my dad had something to do with it." How does a daughter confront the possibility that her father might be a murderer? And how far would she go to uncover the truth? The 1980 murders of Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew, known as the Sweetheart Murders, shook the small town of Watertown, Wisconsin. The young couple had vanished on their way home from a wedding, their disappearance leaving the community in shock. Weeks later, their bodies were found in a field, their deaths violent and inexplicable. Timothy and Kelly's deaths remained unsolved for decades, their families left without answers, and their town haunted by the mystery. But for April, these murders would become the key to unraveling her father's deadly secret. While researching her family's time in Watertown, April discovered a chilling coincidence. Her family had been living in the area at the exact time of the murders. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Could her father have been involved? As April dug deeper, more details began to align. Her father's unpredictable behavior, their abrupt move from Watertown, and the timeline of the murders all pointed to one disturbing possibility. Edward Wayne Edwards might be the sweetheart killer. "We didn't have much to go on back then," one investigator recalls. "The case went cold pretty quickly, but looking back now, there were signs, things we missed or didn't have the tools to investigate properly at the time." April made the hardest decision of her life. She contacted the authorities and told them about her suspicions. Her tip reignited the investigation into the Sweetheart murders, giving detectives a new lead to pursue after decades of dead ends. The DNA evidence confirmed what April had feared. Edward Wayne Edwards was the Sweetheart killer. For detectives, it was a breakthrough. For April, it was the beginning of a nightmare she could never have prepared for. For April Bellaccio, turning in her father was the hardest decision she'd ever make. For years, she had buried the unsettling memories of her childhood, trying to separate the loving father she knew from the dark possibilities she had uncovered. But as the evidence mounted, she realized she could no longer ignore the truth. Torn between loyalty and the need for justice, April made the call that would change everything. With her heart pounding, she dialed the number and waited, the silence stretching unbearably long before a detective answered. "Hi, my name is April," she says. "I think my father might be involved in some murders. I need to talk to someone about this." April's call was a turning point, not just for her, but for the decades-old investigation into the Sweetheart murders. For the first time in years, detectives had a solid lead. But for April, the decision to speak out came with a heavy burden. It wasn't just about turning in her father, it was about unraveling her entire childhood. Every memory, every moment, was now tainted by the possibility that the man she had loved and trusted was capable of unthinkable acts. How do you reconcile the image of a loving dad with the reality of a killer? I didn't want to believe it, she admits. But at some point I had to make a choice. Stay silent and let it haunt me forever, or speak up and maybe get justice for those families. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't say something. April's decision to speak out wasn't just an act of courage. It was the beginning of a journey into darkness, one that would uncover far more than she ever expected. April's tip reignited the investigation into the Sweetheart murders. For decades, the case had remained unsolved, haunting both the families of the victims and the detectives who had worked tirelessly to find answers. Now, with a new lead, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Advancements in DNA technology gave investigators the tools they needed to confirm what April had feared. Edward Wayne Edwards was the killer. His DNA, recovered from the crime scene, matched evidence that had been preserved for decades. The breakthrough was both shocking and devastating. When we got the match, it was like everything clicked, he says. All the dead ends, all the frustration, it suddenly made sense. But it also opened up a whole new set of questions. How many more crimes had he committed? And how had he gotten away with it for so long? The investigation didn't just confirm Edward's guilt in the Sweetheart murders. It revealed a disturbing pattern of violence that stretched across multiple states and decades. Each town, each move, seemed to coincide with another unsolved crime. For detectives, it was like uncovering a trail of destruction that had been hiding in plain sight. Edward's journals provided chilling insights into his mindset. He wrote about his need to dominate, his fascination with death, and his belief that he was smarter than everyone around him. To investigators, it was clear that these weren't just thoughts. They were confessions. Edwards had this ability to blend in, the criminologist explains. He was charming, charismatic, and manipulative. He knew how to disarm people, to make them trust him. That's what made him so dangerous. He could hide in plain sight. With every new piece of evidence, the scope of Edward's crimes grew larger. Detectives began reopening cold cases from across the Midwest, searching for connections to the man who had evaded justice for so long. What they found was a chilling testament to his cunning and brutality. Edward Wayne Edwards eventually confessed to 5 murders, including the Sweetheart murders. But investigators believed the true number of his victims could be much higher. For April, the revelation was both a relief and a new source of pain. It was like finding out my whole life was a lie, she says. But at least now, those families have answers. At least now, they know the truth. Yet, how many more secrets do you think Edward Wayne Edwards take to his grave? After years of evading justice, Edward Wayne Edwards finally found himself cornered. The evidence was undeniable: DNA, witness statements, and a pattern of violence that could no longer be ignored. Under the weight of the facts, Edwards did what few expected. He confessed. "Yeah, I did it," Edwards says, his tone almost casual. "Tim and Kelly in Watertown. That was me. But they're not the only ones." Edward confessed to 5 murders, including the Sweetheart murders of Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew. But as the interrogation continued, it became clear that this was only the beginning. His chilling admissions painted a portrait of a man who thrived on deception, manipulation, and violence. News of Edward's confession spread like wildfire. The man who had once been a loving father and charming neighbor was now exposed as a cold-blooded killer. Communities across the Midwest reeled as the details of his crimes came to light. It wasn't just what he said, the detective recalls. It was how he said it. No remorse, no hesitation. He talked about those lives like they were just moments in his story. That's what made it so chilling. Edward's confession wasn't just a catalog of his crimes. It was a glimpse into the mind of a man who believed he was untouchable. He spoke of his victims with an unsettling detachment, his words revealing a lifetime of calculated cruelty. For April, the man she had once called Dad was now a stranger. His words, his actions, his entire life, everything she thought she knew about him was a lie. How do you reconcile love with betrayal? How do you face the truth when it shatters everything you believed? For April Bellaccio and her family, Edward's arrest brought relief, but also unbearable pain. The man they had trusted, loved, and called their own was now revealed as a monster. The journey to heal would be long and fraught with questions that might never have answers. When I first heard his confession, I couldn't believe it, she says. This was my dad, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who tucked me in at night. How do you process that the person you loved is capable of something so horrific? The family grappled with the unthinkable, the duality of Edward Wayne Edwards. To them, he had been a loving father, a man who could light up a room with his charisma. But now, they were forced to confront the darker side of a man they thought they knew. Edward's arrest not only shattered their image of him, it shattered their sense of self. How do you move forward when your own identity is tied to someone who has committed unspeakable acts? How do you find peace when the past feels like a lie? It's a unique kind of grief, the psychologist says. You're mourning the loss of the person you thought they were, while also grappling with the shame, the anger, and the guilt. It's a process that takes years, if not a lifetime, to navigate. I still love my dad, she admits. But I hate what he did, and I hate that it took me so long to see it. But I'm here now, and I'm trying to make sense of it all. For April and her family, healing came in small, fragile steps. They knew they couldn't change the past, but they could honor the truth and work toward a future where stories like theirs wouldn't be forgotten. Edward Wayne Edwards, a man who had evaded justice for decades, now faced the full weight of the law. The evidence was overwhelming: DNA, confessions, and a trail of destruction that spanned years. For the families of his victims, this was the moment they had waited for. A chance to see the man who had stolen so much finally held accountable. This man didn't just take lives, she says, pointing at Edward. He destroyed families, shattered communities, and lived a double life that allowed him to hide in plain sight. Today we seek justice, not just for the victims, but for everyone who has lived in the shadow of his crimes. Throughout the trial, Edward remained cold and detached. He showed no remorse, no sign of regret for the lives he had taken or the pain he had caused. For the families of his victims, his indifference was both infuriating and heartbreaking. When the sentence was finally handed down, the room was silent. Edward Wayne Edwards was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A fitting end for a man whose life had been defined by manipulation, violence, and deceit. We waited so long for this day, she says. Nothing will bring back my daughter, but at least we know he can never hurt anyone else again. That's the only comfort we have. Edward's sentencing marked the end of a long and painful chapter for the families of his victims. But even behind bars, his story wasn't over. In prison, Edward confessed to additional murders, his chilling admissions revealing a body count that stretched far beyond what investigators had initially uncovered. Every time we thought we'd found the full scope of his crimes, the detective says, he'd reveal something else. It was like peeling back layers of a nightmare that just wouldn't end. Edward Wayne Edwards died behind bars in 2011, leaving behind a legacy of pain and destruction. His death brought some closure to the families of his victims, but the scars he left behind will never fully heal. When he died, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, April admits. Relief that he couldn't hurt anyone else, but sadness for everything he had done, for the lives he destroyed, and for the family he betrayed. Edward's death marked the end of one chapter in April's life, but it also sparked a new mission. She became an advocate for families affected by violence, using her story to bring awareness to the hidden predators who walk among us. Through her advocacy, April has turned her pain into purpose, shining a light on the darkness that her father embodied. Her courage has inspired countless others to speak out, to trust their instincts, and to fight for justice. Edward Wayne Edwards' story is a chilling reminder of the evil that can hide in plain sight. But it's also a testament to the power of courage, determination, and the pursuit of justice. What would you do if someone you loved was hiding such a dark secret? And how far would you go to uncover the truth? April Bellacio's journey is more than a story of betrayal. It is a testament to the power of truth. Despite the pain, the heartbreak, and the unimaginable revelations, she found the courage to speak out. Her bravery reminds us that even in the darkest moments, the truth holds the power to heal, to bring justice, and to protect others. But April's story also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How many more secrets remain buried in the past? How many hidden predators walk among us? their crimes masked by charm and normalcy. And what can we do to ensure that the voices of those who suspect, those who fear, and those who know are heard before it's too late? Her story is a call to action, for communities to remain vigilant, for individuals to trust their instincts, and for all of us to speak out against the darkness hiding in plain sight. It's a reminder that safety is not just a matter of luck. It's a collective responsibility. If you suspect something, say something, she says. No matter how painful it is, no matter how much it hurts, the truth is worth it. Every voice matters. Every action counts. April's courage has inspired others to confront their fears, to question the unknown, and to stand against evil wherever it hides. Her story reminds us that it's never too late to seek the truth, and that even the smallest act of bravery can spark a ripple of change. Thank you for watching CrimeByte. Stories like April's show us that the pursuit of justice is not just about uncovering the past, it's about protecting the future. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping true crime documentaries and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can fight for justice and uncover the truth behind the most chilling crimes.